Recently, Donald Trump gave a 50-day ultimatum. He said Putin has to settle this thing then, or 100% tariffs on Russia's trading partner. And oh, guess what? We're also going to send weapons to Ukraine again. Russian strikes are very intense right now. They are hitting NATO factories, so-called NATO ally factories. A Polish factory was recently just hit. A Polish-owned factory in Ukraine, said Warsaw foreign minister. This was operated by what's called the Berlinik Group, headquartered in the Polish city of Kielce. And Sikorski, people may know the foreign minister of Poland, Mr. Sikorski, for his tweet thanking the USA for the Nord Stream pipeline downing that happened several years ago. Recently, the spokesperson, Dmitry Peskov, was asked about the nuclear doctrine now that the military equipment is going to continue. And there have been rumors that the Trump administration has also said that long-range strikes could be on the table. Dmitry Peskov says that the nuclear doctrine is the same. And that nuclear doctrine says that if a nuclear-armed country arms another country to then hit Russia, then that is essentially and could be interpreted as a declaration of nuclear war. How do you see where this conflict is going now that Trump has essentially said it's on and it's going to be on for as long as it takes?
Yeah, just address the nuclear doctrine very, very quickly. I think that means that Russia reserves the right to use nuclear weapons in response for these conventional attacks coming from Western suppliers, basically. So the fact that they have a formal mechanism for the transfer of arms now that Trump is selling to NATO, and then NATO is distributing to Ukraine, this is a clear traceable chain there. So I mean, it's almost like this is a game of chicken between the West and Russia. Certainly, this is what you can get from the European rhetoric. From the U.S., there's no change really from the U.S. policy. This is just Biden rewarmed, basically. Trump's Biden rewarmed. So all these arms were already paid for and appropriated by the U.S. Congress. So they're going to make their way there, and then there's going to be more Patriot systems and so forth. So this is going to be a losing gambit, of course, but for Ukraine and for the West. But it achieves two things. One is it achieves everybody is making so much money right now on defense stocks, and all the index funds that are related to defense are just through the roof. People have made so much money from European firms like Leonardo and the other British firms as well, and the American firms. So from a financial point of view, jobs, money, it's all there. Great. They want to keep that going in perpetuity. So that's good. But the problem is for Ukraine, they have a manpower crisis. So they don't have an unlimited supply of bodies to throw at the front line. So at some point, this thing's going to come to a crunch. And I think that moment's probably coming soon. They have internal problems and dissent in Ukraine right now against the government. And I'm telling you that it's going to take an ugly form. We're talking about resistance, Ukrainian resistance against the Zelensky regime is going to, at some point in the very near future, become a reality. We're already seeing the resistance to the press gangs pulling people off the streets and so forth. The problem for Ukraine is this is now becoming an air war. And you notice how Russia's very circumspect about how they've carried out their military operation. And they didn't go into full air war mode from the beginning because there were things that need to be achieved. Now the whole of Lugansk has been liberated, you could say, according to the Russian point of view, and of course the DPR, the new region's point of view, it's liberated. Donetsk will soon as well. Those are really important objectives symbolically, because that was the beginning of this. This is also where Ukraine had mounted a lot of their military force and really stacked their resources militarily against those front lines in Lugansk and Donetsk, and those are fallen. So that's going to be a big psychological win for Russia, for the Russian population politically, okay? But the air war, that's what Russia excels at. So now you can see, whose idea would it be to put a European factory on Ukrainian soil and think that this thing isn't going to get blown up one day. I mean, it's just insane that anybody would even think that's a viable business plan. I don't think they could get insurance for that factory either. But the air war, when Russia starts taking out air defenses and Trump wants to send 17 new Patriot systems, they say, oh, it's going to take 3 months to deliver. It's going to take a lot longer than 3 months to deliver these.
Yes.
And so when Russia starts going and targeting the anti-aircraft positions, which they will continue to do, Russia has not even really made this into a proper air war yet. When they have power of the skies, and that day will come, then you can see, yes, Ukraine has done a lot in terms of drone tech on the battlefield, and that has created stalemate along a lot of the front lines. And the credit where credit's due, Ukraine has done extremely well in this area, okay? But Russia hasn't dealt its strong hand yet, and Russia's strong hand is in the air war. And so this is where it's going to go, and then you're going to see the conflict wind up very quickly, very quickly. Look at what Russia has done in Aleppo, in East Aleppo, from the air. Look at what they have done in Grozny and places like this. This is their forte. So it might seem like slow progress and they're grinding it out and stuff. It's because they have objectives and facts on the ground which they needed to achieve first. And the longer this, if they're not, I think Ukraine could lose Odessa if they, in the U.S. and Europe, if they keep dragging this, kicking this can down the road indefinitely, they'll end up losing Odessa, because I think Odessa will collapse. The authority will collapse from within because it's nominally a Russian oblast. So, and then they have only themselves to blame, Europeans, from the beginning of this.
This is Defense One. This is straight out of the Pentagon. U.S. is diverting Patriot systems from Switzerland to Ukraine. So this came right on the heels of this announcement. This is you said, Patrick, this is the timetable. The deliveries were set to begin for the Patriot systems, the 5 Patriot systems ordered made by Raytheon in 2022. Deliveries were set to begin 2026 through 2028. And the article specifically mentions no information is available about how many systems would be affected and what the new timing for future deliveries may be. AKA, it could very well still be that same timeline, which is a long way away from now. It is 2025. Dan, your reaction to all this?
Yeah, well, it's a very interesting period. First of all, I guess what comes to mind, since we were talking about Syria, is we need to talk about a little bit of the overlaps between the Ukraine proxy war and Syria, right? I think one thing that comes to mind is that Russia being bogged down in Ukraine probably prevented them from doing more to save Assad in the 11th hour. And I think that's what this proxy war in Ukraine is about, right? It's to undermine and to weaken Russia. And I think to that extent, it probably did its job in Syria. The other thing that needs to be mentioned is the cross-pollination between the Ukrainian fascists that the West is supporting and the terrorists in Syria, particularly in Idlib. Those terrorists and the fascists in Ukraine have supported each other, trained each other, helped each other in both conflicts. So I think that needs to be pointed out. This is all, kind of there's a unified theory here. Yes, I think Russia, my view is that Russia has taken a very careful and calculated way of prosecuting this war. And I would compare it to how Israel's, prosecuting the genocide in Gaza. Israel wants to destroy the people of Gaza, okay? Russia does not want to destroy the Ukrainian people. It sees the Ukrainian people as its brothers and sisters, right? I think despite the propaganda of the West, Russia has gone very slowly because they have not wanted to attack civilian targets. And they have been willing to take a lot of casualties to do that, to accomplish that. So they have gone very slowly. They could have taken Kiev, I believe, a long time ago. They could have just turned it into Dresden, right? But they didn't want to do that. And I think partly is they have already the hearts and minds of the people of Eastern Ukraine, who I do believe are glad Russia is there. That's the Donetsk, Luhansk, Zaporozhye, and Kherson. And I do agree that in the end, Russia will take Odessa. Odessa was founded by Russia, right? It was founded by Catherine the Great. In the famous movie about the Russian Revolution, the Odessa Steppes were prominent, right? In the Sergei Eisenstein film, the Battle of Potemkin. This is a Russian city, right? So I think ultimately Russia will gain a lot of that territory. It will keep Crimea. I've also visited there recently. Those folks are firmly Russian, want to be part of Russia. So, and as Patrick said, there's no one else to blame for that than Zelensky and the United States and the UK in particular, because it also has to be reiterated that in March of 2022, so about a month into the war, before Russia had taken a lot of territory, if any at all, there was a peace deal that apparently Zelensky himself was willing to sign, the outline of which was agreed to, in which Ukraine could have kept most of its territory, most of its February 2022 territory. But it was the US and UK that intervened to tell Zelensky, don't sign that deal, right? And remember, Boris Johnson, then the prime minister of the UK, flew to Kiev, told Zelensky, don't sign that deal, right? And that brought us to where we are today, where they've lost all this territory, right? And where Russia is going to be like, hey, we were willing to give all that up, but not now, right? We have fought, we have died, we have spent billions of dollars. We're not going to give this up now. And by the way, the people under our authority want to be under our authority. So that's the reality. And I think that's why Trump has been completely foiled in his, I do think he had some limited goal to have peace in Ukraine, but he didn't want to make any concessions to the Russians to do that. And the Russians are like, hey, we've sacrificed too much. So that's where we're at.
Trump approached Vladimir Putin with the so-called art of the deal mentality of give me everything and you get nothing. And some who are skeptical of the Trump administration's talks with Russia from the beginning, which of course have been not happening for a long time now, those ended months ago, have said that the aim was always to just try to get a temporary ceasefire to rearm Ukraine or find another avenue for weakening Russia in this larger strategy of balkanization and regime change. And there was never any hope for real peace to be brokered by Trump administration. What do you say to that, given, I pulled up the article from Defense One. It's the same issues that we saw during the Biden administration. Right? Is constant funneling of weapons. Now there's talks of long-range strikes. Trump says no right now, but we know that the word is not bond when it comes to Trump administration or any U.S. administration for that matter.
Yeah, everything's on the table. So I would immediately, if Russia's obviously very, let's say, circumspect looking at this situation. Iran was given a 60-day ultimatum. And what happened on the 61st day? A sneak attack during negotiations. So that's how the U.S. operates. So they use negotiations as a cover for a sneak attack or to rearm the other side or the counterparty's adversary. So they've already, Russia's expecting. So I think there's to me as a cynic, I'm looking at this 50-day ultimatum. Trump's throwing these out all over the place. It's just meaningless. What they are, I think, is he is kind of making an ultimatum, is that there's going to be a military operation at the end of that, and we're going to hurt you. And so if you saw Operation Spider's Web, what Ukraine managed to pull off, surely with U.S. help, maybe with Israeli help as well, which was hitting the the Russian strategic bombers and multiple targets deep within Russian territory. I think they'll be planning something similar, maybe not the same, but in terms of the amount of targets and how deep they go, that's probably what they're planning for 50 days. I just see a pattern. It just keeps, anytime there's a potential impasse or there's some crisis in Ukraine politically, or Zelensky's just extended his presidential powers another 3 months. So this 50-day ultimatum might sort of land pretty close to where Zelensky has to renew his presidential emergency extension another 3 months. And what would be the perfect thing would be some glorious attack, some gallant attack by the brave, feisty Ukrainians. Have done it again. They've hit the Russians deep, and they've killed this politician or this general as well. And so then the West will be like, oh, that's fantastic, more weapons, more money, and Trump will, we warned them, we warned Putin, and that will last. Maybe the sting of that might last for a few days, and it doesn't materially change where the battle lines are on the ground and the steady advances that Russia's making. So the problem with Trump and these ultimatums and what Trump's calling deals. Okay, so we're going to get a deal. Oh, I've done a deal here. I've done a deal with India and Pakistan. He's done a deal with everybody. A deal is not an agreement. An agreement takes a lot of consternation and negotiations, and an agreement doesn't just take two countries. It normally takes a host of other countries to guarantee various aspects of that, to glue that together. That's how it's done internationally throughout history. Trump, in his infinite wisdom as the great businessman, he said, no, forget about international relations, forget about treaty history, forget about diplomacy. My way is better. I just arrived here in January. I know how to do this better than anybody because I'm great. And so I'm going to make a deal. And so this is why he's failing so miserably in Ukraine, failing so miserably. I won't say failing in terms of, this is the U.S., British, Western geostrategic interest that's playing out here. But in terms of getting some kind of a ceasefire or a peace agreement, he's completely fumbled in Ukraine, failed, like worse than failed in Gaza. And Iran, it's just literally, instead of getting a peace deal or a nuclear deal, he's nearly got World War III. So there's nothing to celebrate with this president. And he's not even 7 months into his first term. I think this is just probably going to go down in history. I didn't think this was possible, to say that there would be a worse president than Joe Biden, but Donald Trump is going to give him a run for his money.
There's the concrete threat that Trump gave to Russia, that not only is there going to be tariffs, increased sanctions on Russia in this 50-day ultimatum, but also the United States is going to level 100% tariffs on its trading partners, which is hilarious because now the Western mainstream media is admitting that Trump has had to back off of China, but that would include China. He would have to 100% tariffs on Russia's biggest trading partner. That we would go through that whole saga again. But here we have the Russian ruble and stock market gain after the threats. I mean, the Russian ruble has been doing very well over the course of much of this conflict, and it reversed losses against the dollar, rose against China's yuan after President Trump warned he would impose severe tariffs on Russia if no deal was made. It's up about 45% against the dollar since the start of last year. So, I mean, this is just consistently backfiring on the United States. As Patrick said, this is a failed war, and Trump seems to be pouring gasoline on the fire.
The Russians were ready for this, right? They were ready for the sanctions. Apparently, Sergei Lavrov, the foreign minister, was one of the intellectual authors of the defense of Russia against these sanctions. They had planned this for some time. in the end, the sanctions made Russia stronger, right? I'll give you one example. When I was in Russia, I talked to a lot of people. They used to go to Europe a lot on vacation. Now they just travel Russia, right? Russia has 11 time zones, right? It's a huge country. It's a vast country. And now Russians are getting to explore their own country. They're spending money in their own country instead of going to Europe. But that's just one example. Sanctions can strengthen countries when they decide, okay, well, we're going to make what we need. We won't import stuff. Again, our tourism will be internal. And that's what Russia was prepared to do. It's what it did do. Russia got stronger. It's Europe that got hurt by the sanctions, right? Europe was cut off from the natural gas from Russia that they depended for, even when Russia was the Soviet Union, right? And then the U.S. blew up the Nord Stream pipeline, Nord Stream 2, which Angela Merkel of Germany had begged Putin to build, right? So Europe's the one who's been hurt by the sanctions, not Russia. And I think that's what Russia sees. That's what the Russian investors see, is that they will just be strengthened by all this. They will find ways to be a more self-sustaining economy. And it's Europe, again, that will be hit. And by the way, I don't think that's an accident. I think the U.S. is happy to hit Europe, right? The U.S.'s their logic is to attack all competitors. And it doesn't matter if they're allies or they're not allies. All competitors are on the chopping block. So kudos to Russia. And again, I do think Russia learned a lot from being the Soviet Union, right? Because the Soviet Union went through this. They went through periods where they were completely isolated, laid siege to. And so Russia has a long history of being able to have a war economy, to have an economy under siege and survive. And they're showing that they can do it.
And this is we're carefully threading the needle here, because Putin's chief financial advisor only last week announced that there is going to be a tightening of the Russian economy, and so they're running very high interest rates to stabilize the ruble. This has been somewhat successful, but they're projecting for 2025 somewhere around 2.3 to 2.5% GDP. That is down from 4.3% or roughly in 2024, and so they're going to have to do some quantitative easing, and that means I assume that means lowering interest rates because rough times are ahead. There has been a bite from the sanctions and the prohibiting of oil sales and so forth that the West have been doing. This is hurting the Russian economy. However, Russia's because of its size, its scale, and the fact that it has something to sell to the world, it's able to, I think, be very resilient and weather this storm. And if that means, devaluing the ruble up, a couple of points, back to where it was maybe 3 years ago, they're fully prepared to do that. And I think internally I don't think it's going to have a great impact on the Russian economy internally. But the problem is when you see those announcements, the United States, how they talk to themselves in Washington is some advisors will come to Trump, and I think they think that they still believe that they can win this economic war with Russia, because the currency of the realm in Washington is erroneous templates based on history. Okay, we broke the Soviet Union with the arms race. We're going to bleed them again. We bled them in Afghanistan, and we're going to do that again in Ukraine. And it's just like all these facsimiles of history that just get rehashed and reheated in the minds of think tankers and politicians, because they can just easily grasp to that and then say that to the crowd, and the crowd loves hearing that. They love hearing that. And then they go on and make that into policy. We're going to do it again. We're going to win the economic war, just like we did in the late 80s, kind of thing. And that's not actually what happened in the late 80s, but that's the popular mythology in Washington. That's enough to keep the policy going. In the arms race, hey, we're making money. In the words of Lindsey Graham, this is a low cost. No American boys are being killed, just plenty of Ukrainians, but no Americans, and we're making plenty of money in the process. This is a great little war. And so they're going to keep, I think all these things feed into a little bit of signals of Russia struggling economically. Boom, that gets amplified in Washington. And they think, oh, we're doing it. We're winning. Look at their GDP drop. Look at the Russian, but America's GDP is dropping as well, and so is Europe's. So relatively speaking, there is a global contraction economically. So of course they're going to misread that. Of course they're going to mistranslate that and repackage that into some kind of a winning gambit from the U.S. This is just how the knuckle-dragging Cro-Magnon mentality of the average American policymaker these days in Washington works, and that it. You know, I have yet, the reason I'm saying this, because I have not heard anybody with any intelligent commentary. And I've been waiting for 3 years. Nothing. So I assume it's not there. I assume there's nothing going on with any of these guys. It's frustrating. Normally there's some, dissenter, some outliers who come in. And on this issue, I don't hear anything. I do hear people that say they want the war to stop. That's about as far as the dissent goes. But in terms of the policy, the analysis, and the strategy, I don't hear anything. There's no alternative at all. So I assume that they don't have anything.